What is up, buddy, beautiful people? It is I, AkemiTCG, back here with a brand new video. Traps. I feel like so many more people are playing Traps this format because the format's so much slower than it was last format. There's no more insanely huge combos. I mean, you can still make big boards, but there's a lot less of those decks because Link Cross is gone. So what are the best traps you should run for this format? I'm just only going to be showcasing generic traps, nothing very deck specific, just very generic traps. Hope y'all enjoy. We are back here in the den yet again. January 2021 format, we are shifting towards a more control based format, so you're going to see a lot more traps being used nowadays. Whereas the previous formats have been mostly combo, where your opponent just makes an unbreakable board, and setting traps is just simply way too slow. I know there's a lot of traps in this game, but these are pretty much the main traps I've picked up on that I've seen, you know, people play in some way, shape, or form in the past 2 or 3 years. I'm not saying that there's other traps and that they're completely irrelevant, and I am omitting, again, traps that are deck specific, such as Dogmatic of Punishment, personal spoofing, stuff like that. But I may have missed some, so if I did, please let me know down below in the description. Alright, let's get started. Again, this is an opinion, and everybody is entitled to their own opinion. Antispell Fragrance, extremely good in Pendulum format. If you get your opponent in the Submorg lock, where you somehow summon Dark Submorg by abusing the green Link 3 bird that we have in the Tri-Brigade variants, then it could be really, really good. But Antispell, it's just not too amazing right now, especially since a lot of spells, a lot of decks kind of need spells to go off. So I would put that in the B or C tier, just because I just don't see it being used that much. I understand, like, yes, you could flip them against Dytron and it'd be pretty good. It slows them down for 1 turn, but that's it. It slows them down for 1 turn. You want to be able to get rid of said spells as well. And what's really, really neat about this card, which I like too, is if your opponent, like, let's say like you flip Antispell Fragrance, you're going first, your opponent draws into Harpy's Feather Duster, then they can't use it until they turn after, which is really neat. That's why I'm putting it B tier. It completely shuts down pendulums. They can't put stuff on their scales because you can't set the scales. But other than that, I put it at B tier just because it doesn't quite get rid of the problem, it just prevents the problem from happening. A Pointer of the Red Lotus. If you're going first, good. Rip a card out of your opponent's hand, pay 2k, it's fine. If you're going second, awful. That's why I put it in the B tier as well. It's just one of the cards that I feel like will permanently stay in the sideboard, just depending on if you can fit it in your deck. If you're playing a lot of 1-2 card combos, then the opponent is pretty good. If you're going first and then you setting it up, and then you can cheese out your opponent. But I feel like it's just not versatile in every deck, and sometimes just getting rid of one card doesn't solve the problem completely. Sometimes they have another extender, sometimes they have another opener in hand. Next, we have Blazing Mirror Force. Now, I don't want to see stuff get destroyed and sent to the graveyard, just because a lot of cards nowadays just have a lot of recursion getting sent to the graveyard. But what's neat about this card is you do burn some damage, both you and your opponent. So it could give you an edge if Blazing Mirror Force ends the battle phase on the next turn. You have a more of a leg up towards defeating your opponent. But otherwise, a lot of cards just have protection against destruction nowadays, so I just put it as C tier. Honestly, it just doesn't make sense, guys. And it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't. Compulsory Evacuation Device. So target a card, target a monster, return it to the owner's hand. Very simple. Extremely good on monsters. Let's say like if they link summon a monster and it doesn't have an on summon effect, it has like an effect that you can activate once per turn, then that's like the most value you can get off of that. You can return their VFD and whatnot. But that's all it does, right? It doesn't get rid of multi problems, it only gets rid of one problem. And even then, nowadays, sometimes your opponent's going to have more than one problem on the board. Sometimes they're going to have Kristra and something else. And not to mention, compulsory does target, so I'm going to put it at the B tier for this format. Macro Cosmos. Oh boy, if you draw into this card, you're a legend. This card shuts down so many decks, you have no idea how many decks this card shuts down. That's why I'm putting it at A tier. The only problem is it wouldn't be an S tier. It would be an S tier rather if, and only if, this card was at 3, but Macrocosmos should never, ever, ever be at 3. It's just a bad time for Yu-Gi-Oh players all around, and it's just a good card. Just a really, really good card. That's all I can say about it. Crackdown. So target your opponent's monster, it's yours, and its effects cannot be activated while it's yours, and it cannot attack. It's kind of in the same boat with Compulse, but with Compulse, sometimes your opponent can just recur and resummon it, but with Crackdown, they just completely lose that completely. They lose that chess piece completely. But the only problem is it's a continuous trap, which means they can chain Twin Twisters, Cosmic to it, and it gets blown out. So you really have to pick your battles here. With Compulse, you can just chain it to Twin Twisters, and with Crackdown, you kind of really can't do that. It doesn't really do much, because you would just take your opponent's monster, and then it just goes back. But you have to choose your battles, and that's why I'm putting it at B tier. I'm not saying it's an awful card, but it's just niche. It's niche, but when it works, it works. Debunk. Okay, a lot of people are talking about this card. They're like, oh, this card is the next best thing since sliced bread. You have to understand that Debunk, yes, it's a speed spell 3 because it's a counter trap. Yes, it negates the effect of a monster that activates in the hand or in the graveyard. And yes, you don't have to pay life points for it. But that's it. It doesn't negate monsters on the field. It doesn't negate monsters activated from the banish pile. None of that. It just prevents your opponent from, popping off with cards like Miss or hand traps. It's just way too slow. In all consideration, I think Solemn Strike is just a better card. But if you're afraid of these hand traps, you're afraid of stuff activated in the graveyard, then yeah, sure, you can play 3 Debunks and 3 Solemn Strikes. But if you ask me, if you're choosing between Debunk or Solemn Strike, I'm choosing Solemn Strike every time. Because me having less than 1,500 life points, that's tricky. That doesn't really happen that often, unless you're about to lose. That's why I put it at B tier. Drowning Mirror Force. The only stipulation, it does return the monsters to the deck, which is really good. The only stipulation is you can't control any monsters, or I believe it has to be a direct attack. So I would say it's better than Blazing. However, you have to understand it has to be a direct attack. But since it's strictly better than Blazing, I'm going to put it at the B tier. Evenly Match. If you're playing a going second strategy, it's very, very good. If your deck always wants to go second, Evenly Match is extremely good. If you're trying to play going first or second, you never want to draw into Evenly Match going first. And also, it doesn't really get rid of core problem cards. Like, you can evenly match a Ditron player and they can just keep their Krishna. You can evenly match a Zodiac player, they can keep their Zeus. You can evenly match a Virtual World player, they'll just keep their True King of All Calamities. So you really have to fight your battles there. I do like this card a lot. I do play this card a lot because, a lot of my decks are going second strategies. However, I don't have a choice but to put it in B tier because it doesn't get rid of the problem. It gets rid of everything but the problem. And it can give you a huge advantage in the long run. But if, let's say like you open Evenly Match in Dark Hole, you're solid. Next is Get Out. So it's Compulse, but it has to be, I believe, 2 monsters summoned from the extra deck. With Ditron, they don't really summon stuff from the extra deck, they just ritual stuff and summon Krishna. Sometimes Zoo players are just sitting a Zeus. Sometimes it's not Zeus and Dryden, it's just Zeus. And for Virtual World, sometimes it's really just VFD, and that's all they sit on. So that's why I don't think it's nearly as good as Compulse, because it's just not as flexible. And plus, sometimes you want to compulse your own cards, so I just put that in C tier. I don't think it's just good right now at all. Next, Heavy Storm Duster. It's a Twin Twisters, but you can't conduct your battle phase on the turn you use it, so basically you want to use it during your opponent's turn. But you don't have to discard 1, which is nice. But, however, the problem is it sends their stuff to the graveyard. Against certain matchups, you don't want this to happen. Especially against Virtual World, sometimes you don't want to send their spells to the graveyard. Against, Eldritch, you don't want to send their traps to the graveyard. So I'm just going to honestly put it at C tier right now, just because the abundance of decks are running around right now that this card just won't benefit you as easily. Because again, it doesn't get rid of the monsters, right? Spells and traps generally, I'm saying generally because it's very general here. Spells and traps will not kill you. Monsters will kill you. If you guys are enjoying this video so far, make sure to drop a like, comment, and subscribe so we can crush the YouTube algorithm and get the channel to the top this year. Ice Dragon's Prison, you already know I'm putting this at S tier. I think this is probably the best trap in the entire game. It does so many different things, excuse me. It does so many different things for the format. A, it acts as a graveyard interrupt. B, you steal your opponent's monster, so therefore you can still attack with it. And then C, you can link someone with it and do whatever you want with that monster, honestly, besides activate effects, but that's no biggie. And then D, non-targeting banish. What? It does everything you want in a trap card, especially in a control format, all in one. I'm like stumbling on words here, my bad guys. But it does everything you want in one card, and that's why I put Ice Dragon's Prison in S tier. It's just a really good card. Imperial Order, S tier. Shutting off your opponent's spells, I mean not S tier, A tier. Shutting off your opponent's spells is so strong. I know it shuts off your own spells as well, but really depending on the matchup, you can blow them out for good. If you're playing against, you know, what was it, Dogmatica Invoked, and they just open Nadir and Meltdown, they can't use either of those cards, so they lose. It's pretty rough for a lot of decks. But again, it's not at 3, so I wouldn't put it at S tier. But this card will single-handedly win you games, 100%. I guarantee you. Against certain matchups, it's just a win. It's just a dub. Infinite Impermanence. I honestly, right now, would put this card... Oh, this is really hard because it's a hand trap too, so it has a lot of bonuses, advantages a trap doesn't have. So I have to put it at A tier. In every other format, I would put this at S tier. The reason why I put it at A tier right now is it doesn't really stop a lot of top decks. Like, for example, depending on the virtual world player, sometimes they'll activate VF during standby, and then you can chain Imperm. Or sometimes they'll wait until you summon a monster, then they activate VFD's effect, so you can't activate Imperm from your hand. That is something to consider. All the virtual stuff activates in the hand, and I feel like the best case scenario and use for it is if your opponent has Christia on the field and you just drop Imperm on their Christia during your turn. That's really it. You could drop it on Zeus as well. So it's very applicable, but because virtual worlds are at the top right now next to Dytron, it's just really tricky and I cannot put it at S tier, unfortunately. So hopefully the trend doesn't continue where Imperm gets worse and worse, because I feel like that's what Konami does. They make these cards and make them really OP in the current format, but then once they finally reprint them as maybe a common, a rare, or a super, it just becomes invalid in the current format. Like if you look at a lot of OCG lists, a lot of them are even playing Imperm anymore. So keep that in mind, guys. Lost Wind, it's just an Imperm but worse. I mean, it can recur from the graveyard, but that was about it. Mirror Force, just don't do it. Blazing Mirror Force, just play Blazing Mirror Force instead, please. If you're playing Mirror Force, just play Blazing. They both do the same thing, except one blows up your opponent's life points, and one doesn't. Just don't do it. Needed Something, I will put at A tier. Good card. Just really easy fulfillment. Really easy requirement to fulfill, rather. And you just destroy the board, and then next turn you just make a board. That's it. And there's no real trigger for it besides, I believe it has to be 4 or more monsters on the field. It's just destroy all face-up monsters. So all your face-down monsters are still protected as well. And also, the requirement is only has to be 4 or more monsters on the field. Not all of those monsters have to be face-up. Very important here, very important. Quaking Mirror Force, I do like Quaking a little bit more than Blazing, but almost as equally as much as Drowning. You flip them all face down, they can't reflip them. It just does not work against Lynx. That's why I'm putting it at B tier as well. But this card can definitely win you games as well, because they can't reflip that card up. So pretty much the only thing they can do with that set card is either tribute it, or yeah, that's about it. They just gotta tribute it, or your opponent has to kill it. That's really it. Red Reboot, again, in a trap heavy format, it's really good, so just put it at A tier. If it was at 3, I put it at S tier, but that's how it would be. Artifact Sanctum, Dytrons in particular don't really need the extra deck, so it's not nearly as good. Against other decks, it's a blowout. you just drop Scythe and it's a blowout. So that's why I'm going to put it at B tier. Solemn Judgment. I don't think I could ever put this card below A tier. I think, so this is for the purpose of all you guys. Solemn Judgment, Solemn Strike, and then Solemn Warning is not nearly as good in my opinion. Because Strike does essentially the same thing as Warning, except it doesn't, Warning negates cards that would summon a monster as well, where Strike does not. Strike has to negate like inherent summons and whatnot, or like special summon monsters that have effects, or negate monster effects rather. Judgment and Strike. Judgment's really good going first. You just negate anything besides monster effects, and then Strike just straight up negates monster effects. It's just literally a better debunk. It's a better debunk. And also has more application than debunk as well. And then Warning just negates the summons. Doesn't really get rid of the problems. It prevents the problems from happening. But Strike gets rid of the problems, and then Judgment is just up there because it negates spells and traps, which very few of these cards do. I forgot to add in Dark Bride, my bad guys. Storming, Mirror Force. So I like this card a lot right now. I like this card a lot. I would put this at A tier. And the reason being is, it works on Link monsters. It bounces the cards back to their hand, and if it's in their, if it was a monster summoned with the extra deck, it bounces it back to the extra deck, which could be detrimental. But it shuts them down for that turn. With Quaking, you still have to deal with the set cards. You still have to deal with the set cards on the field. Like, you can't just... Sometimes they have a big booty, so you can't run them over. But Storming gets rid of all the problems completely without destroying the cards, without sending them to the graveyard. And if you send them to the graveyard, sometimes they get more advantage. So I feel like Storming, out of all the Mirror Forces, is the best Mirror Force. Right now. If we didn't have Links, then I would argue with Quaking, but Storming's really good. Summon limit. A lot of decks summon more than once, but in a control format, some decks just need only 1 or 2 summons to pop off. That's why I would put this at C tier. Oh no, B tier. I wouldn't put it at C tier because this card is a blowout to certain decks as well. Torrential Tribute. I really like this card right now, so I'm putting it at S tier. People just summon left and right. That's just the name of the game, guys. You have to summon monsters to win. A lot of Yu-Gi-Oh players get impatient, but you have to understand the reason why Yu-Gi-Oh players get impatient because they know if they just VFD you and shut you off for 1 turn, if they don't kill you in the next turn, you can top deck a card that could potentially turn the whole game around. So they don't want to take any chances, and Torrential Tribute kind of helps with that. It's like a mind game that you can play on your opponent. Some people are smart and they won't like summon monsters to go into it, but you really have to use your intuition. And if you hold this card for a while, let's say like you set it like turn 1, and you hold it for a long time, and your opponent has seen you like not flip it and not use it at all, they might start playing more lax and playing more aggressive, and that's when you truly flip Torrential Tribute. You can mind game your opponent to oblivion. Best. Typhoon, just not good. It destroys a fatal card on the field, face a spell or trap, but if your opponent controls 2 or more spells and traps than you do, then you can activate it from your hand. It's just not gonna happen in this format. I feel like most of the time if they play 5 formation Tenki, they're gonna play the Tenki first, get the search, and then set the 2 trap cards. Like, it's almost like Yu-Gi-Oh 101. This is like a what is it called? If your opponent sets first and then activates a field spell or something of the sort, then yes, Typhoon's good. But most Yu-Gi-Oh players, at least on the higher level, know not to do that and just activate cards ASAP before Typhoon can actually hit them. Unending Nightmare, I just don't think it's good right now, so I'm putting this at D tier. In a Pendulum format, it would be a lot better, but even then, it wouldn't go higher than a B tier, to be quite honest. Waken the Dragon, I can see this being used where your opponent just pops the card, they Cosmic it, they pop it with something. It doesn't matter as long as it's removed from the field because of your opponent's card effect. You can special summon a monster from an extra deck for free. It's good, but the thing is, it relies on your opponent blowing up your back row. That's all it relies on. And if they don't do that, the card's dead. So that's why I'm putting it in C tier. With Warning Point, I feel like if you play Warning Point, it's just kind of almost as good as Solemn Warning, except slightly worse because it's not a speed spell 3, so your opponent can chain to it with something else other than Reboot. It could be better, it really could be better, but in this format right now, I don't feel like it's good. Because you have to open it going first. If you go second and you draw into this, it's essentially dead, because by the time your turn happened, most likely your opponent would have already established a board. Last but not least, Witch's Strike, just don't do it, guys. Don't do it. Way too situational. It could be really good, but way too situational. Anyways, that is all I have for you guys. I know this was a very long list, but if you guys stuck to the end, I really appreciate it. And my bad, guys, I'm stumbling on my words today. I'm really tired, but I gotta put out a video for all of you guys, because you guys are awesome. Anyways, I am AkemiTCG. I will see you guys next time. Alright, bye guys.
The world ends now.